Welcome to the talk, Boosting Productivity with Android Studio plugin. To clarify, what is this icon next to the Android Studio icon? This is Litho, and Litho is a framework for building Android UI screens. And in this talk, I will cover how we build Android Studio plugin for this framework. So what we will know in this session. In the next 30 minutes, I will walk you through the journey, how to identify the problem in the one's workflow, how to cover methods of different research for the identified problem, and cover the details of the implementation based on the research conducted. And all of this is happening in Android Studio context. So problem is the core element we need to understand before starting accomplishing any task. The question the person should ask is what I am solving, who will benefit from my work? So what problems may exist in the Android Studio workflow? Let's see. This is Litho code. It builds the UI in the Android. The code itself is open sourced and it's present in the GitHub. If you want to take a look later after this presentation, the link is at the bottom of the screen. So Litho itself was created in mind with developer productivity and application performance. So this one is achieved by the declarative way of writing code and the focus on the meaningful actions for the developers only. So what I mean is that, for example, this screen that includes 2 buttons, it is implemented with only the code from the onCreate layout method. So this column.create and 2 childs, this is the code that creates whole UI. And all other methods, signatures, are boilerplate code that the developer does not need to care about. So this was the expectation, that Litho provides these hooks into the Litho component lifecycle, like onCreate initial state, onCreate layout, onEvent, and developer will fill those meaningful parts inside those methods. Expectations looks really good. So how in reality my workflow looks like? Let's imagine my typical morning. So I get some coffee, I have ideas, I get the design mock from the designer, and I'm planning to quickly create a new screen. And I'm starting with creating this new Java file. Logically, Java file is blank. So maybe I will spend a few minutes trying to recall what is the code I need to write. So was this on create layout? What is this on create state? I don't really remember. If it's red, then it's not correct. I will try to guess one more time. Fortunately, this time the guess was right. So this, I have an annotation, sounds great. It's not really, because I still need to fill the method signatures, and I don't remember them at all. Was it private? Was it private static boolean? So I end up and will go to the documentation and copy the method signature from it. And this, I repeat this process like every day, a few times. Does it sound like productive workflow? What does it mean to be productive? What do we know about human efficiency and productivity? So what I just described consisted of 2 actions, search and coding. So I first searched for the information and then I coded it. I'm not blocked at any stage of this. I'm not slowed down because I know exactly where in the documentation go and look for the information I need. In fact, I even feel quite productive. I can have more actions. I can make a coffee in meantime, and it will make even everything is better. So this does not look bad, but what we know, in fact, that the context switch between different activities comes at a price for human brain. The more person is engaged in the task, the more time it takes to fully engage and switch to a new activity, because the brain needs to recreate all mental models about architecture details that one can have in mind while writing code. Also, this may feel quite tiring. I bet every person had those days when they had a few meetings during the day, like a few 30-minute meetings. And it does not sound like a lot, like 2 30-minute meetings. But by the end of the day, one can find a few hours of productive work lost. So there might be a lot of activities, a lot of switching between tasks, a lot of search, but by the end of the day, 0 tasks are closed. And regarding this, I like the slogan, don't confuse motion with the progress. So if there is a lot of motion but 0 progress, this is not the productive workflow. So what if I can tell you that we can remove the search part at all? What if IDE will help us accomplish all those boilerplate code, so we don't need to search for it, and we will end up with the coding only? So it will be one continuous activity of the same type. a good news that even if you are a super person who's not suffering from this context switch, you don't need, you are engaging in the task immediately, you don't need any additional time, then even for you, this absence of search will still give back 20 to 30 minutes, 30% of time. Okay, great. So we kind of find a problem. The next question we should ask, is this problem a common? So why we are caring? Because anyone, it's easy to guess or assume that everyone has the same problems. Like if I'm experiencing this, then all my teammates experience this, all Android developers experience this. But I bet everyone had, in their life, had some crash when you searched for it, and all that you found is one single post from 2018 or 2014 without any answer straight. And at that stage, you find yourself alone on this battlefield fighting with the crash, and you're wondering why no one experienced it, why you're so unlucky. Yeah, this happens. So to be clear, we don't want to solve that types of problems. It will be super inefficient to spend a week solving a problem that will never happen again. So, okay, we decided that we want to understand, is this a common problem or not? How will we do that? So for that, one might think okay, I will just go around and ask my colleagues over a coffee. Did you feel productive yesterday? That might be not the best strategy because people might just not remember. So what we did is that we took methods and approaches from the product research and applied them to developers. So one of the core ideas in the product research is the personas idea. So we want to understand who are those people who have same struggles as me. So the people I was interested in is other Android developers. So I wasn't really interested in the iOS developers or designers or product managers, because I was interested if the Android developers using Litho had the same problems as me. After identifying the persona, those people I'm interested in, like Android developers using Litho, I need to switch and define and find a method. How would I ask questions? Again, we referred to the methods used in the product research, and one of such methods is the contextual inquiry. So the idea about this method is to observe developers in their natural environment. So what we did is that group of developers interested in the developer experience, we reached out to 20 other developers with the question, would you mind if we observe your work and understand what actions you are doing in your workflow? So the response was quite positive. In doing these observations, it's very important to remember that our thoughts might not be aligned, and it's very important to ask the observed person what they're thinking. So I can give one example. When the person was doing the class search and they found some class, I marked this as a positive experience because I thought that they were successful. But when I asked the person, hey, can you describe me, how did you know the class name for search? The person answered, no, I did not know, and I did not find the class I was looking for. So their experience was opposite to what I expected and to what I assumed. So this is very important to ask questions, but also important to not introduce bias to the observation, because if I will ask something like, hey, why don't you use this Android Studio shortcut? And the person might answer, yeah, I use it always. And they might never know about that shortcut at all. So with such questions, which suggest the answer, we might not observe the real situation. Next method that we used is the concept testing. So contextual inquiry is about observing the natural tasks that people are doing, and concept testing is preparing the list of specific tasks and ask people to go over them. It's very important that the list of tasks are the same for all developers, because this way we can find commonalities. Otherwise, if one person creating the screen, second person is doing the data fetch, third person is creating the event listeners, they will all have unique actions, and it will be harder to find the commonalities between them. About the number of developers for these two methods, so we approached 20, but for such deep investigation, even 10 developers might be enough. About the timing, so we spent from 45 to 90 minutes, and it was the optimal timing for these investigations, because lower time will not allow us to gather enough signals, and more than 2 hours time, we saw that people started repeating themselves. We stopped gathering more signals after some threshold. And the last method I want to tell you about is the surveys. So surveys is the least time consuming. So we can ask a person to answer the questions in 5-10 minutes. And this way we can cover 50 people in 10 minutes. But this is also the least useful, I would say, because you need to know the questions in advance. You cannot have new insights from the surveys. It's more about understanding the general attitude. For example, questions might be like, do you find easy to use this action? Do you find easy to search or navigate documentation? This kind of stuff. And at this stage, when we have identified the problem and we did the research and we have some conclusions, it's very important to proceed to the implementation stage. Because again, I like that slogan, not confuse motion with the progress, and absent implementation would be like zero progress. It will be just motion. In this video that I will start shortly, it shows the main possibilities of the Android Studio plugin for Litho that we implemented. I will continue discussing implementations of those features after this 1-minute video. So yeah, please pay attention to it, and I will describe more details later. See that navigation is between different classes. Okay, so these are the main implemented features. This is not the exhaustive list, but I want to focus on them. After releasing the plugin to the developers and to the users, we introduced the logging to analyze the usage and understand what features were most useful. So I'm kind of interested to hear what do you think is the most used feature from the video you just saw. I will not hear your answer, but I will still pause for 2 seconds for you to think, like, what do you think? Like, try to guess what was the most useful feature. Okay, the answer is navigation. So for me, when I saw these results of the usage, for me, it was a surprise because I personally bet on the code completion. This is what I struggled with. This is what I needed, and that the Android Studio completed the code for me. But the reason for this was interesting and a bit obvious, that developers more often read code than they write new one. So that was an interesting insight. File generation. So what does it mean? Litho uses annotation processor to generate classes. So there is a Litho spec class, which is a blueprint, and Litho component, which is the generated class. And annotation processor are running during compilation stage. And it feels like we are running compilation very often, and it's very quick. But in reality, there is a situation when you open a project and you want to start investigating it and navigating around straight away, but those absent classes that should be generated, they are red. So you cannot navigate on them, you cannot see documentation, you cannot use methods on them, and that's very frustrating. The next one is warnings. So Litho has a specific list of own warnings, and previously, before implementing the plugin, those warnings were discovered during the either compilation time or runtime. And it was very progress blocking for the developer, for the person, for me personally as well, to write the code and then compile it and discover there was some mistake, and you need to write a lot of it later. So on-the-fly warnings as you type it are very important. And here is code completion, this one that I was thinking should be on the first place. So yeah, code completion is for the developers actively using Litho and needing those completion of the different methods, parameters, classes, and file templates. They are in the same area. So file templates is very important to have, but they're used only by the people who implement new component on your screen. Let's dig deeper into the implementation details of all those features I just described. So plugin.xml file is the config file. It's in the core of the plugin, in a sense, as Android manifest file is the core of the application that describes what are those extensions that Android system has to hook into the Android application. The same way plugin.xml file describes what extensions into the IntelliJ environment plugin has. I'm saying IntelliJ because Android Studio is based on the IntelliJ. So if you write an IntelliJ plugin, it will work on both platforms. Yeah, let's go over the list of features that we have for our Litho IntelliJ plugin. So extensions .IntelliJ means that these are the extensions for the package .IntelliJ. This is the extension point for the navigation application service, interesting type. This is very similar idea to the Android services that are just running in the background during the lifetime. Just here, this is the lifetime of the IntelliJ application instead of the Android application. So we used this service to generate files because we needed file to be preserved during the project open time. Annotator is the extension, and completion contributors are extension as well. So extensions is very useful because they provide a convenient way to hook into different features of the IntelliJ so that you don't need to write a lot of custom code yourself. Other types of, I would say, extensions are named actions, and actions are for the events, for the intentions that are triggered by the user. For example, creating a new file. It's not something hidden. To create a new file, user, developer will go into the file new menu and explicitly press the button to create a new file. And yeah, so a new file is implemented as an action. Also interesting to know that extensions, they're not specific for the IntelliJ platform only. So the plugin itself can create own extensions to allow other plugins to hook into its implementations. Now, plugin code is the part of the Litho repository, so the link is below. And now I will go deeper into all of those classes. So I will not code from the scratch because it will be too time consuming. But for every feature, I will try focusing on some interesting specifics that developers may pay attention to. So yeah, navigation is extending the endpoint. And interesting here is that for the navigation, you have access to the source element that is clicked. But it's also interesting, and I discovered it only later, that navigation is triggered not only when the user clicks or presses Command B, but when the user hovers over the element. That's why this endpoint might be triggered very often, like every second. That's why the method itself should not fetch information from the internet or should not have any CPU consuming actions, because they can just freeze IntelliJ if they will be super long or super time consuming. Useful feature how IntelliJ may help here is this result method. So you might notice on the project open that Android Studio indexes the files, and this is how Android Studio and IntelliJ, they are creating this map that binds each reference to the class that this element referencing. So by doing this simple resolve, you can understand which method a person wants to go. For example, for the Litho, if I see that the person wants to go to the clicks on the generated component, this probably means that they want to see the code for the Litho spec blueprint and not for the generated code. That's why this results method I find very useful, because I can see that it's resolving to the component and I can return the spec method itself. File generation, as I mentioned, there is no specific endpoint because for every class you will have, for every plugin, for every framework, you will have your own specific ideas how you want to generate files. And good to know that even though this is Java code, and obviously you can use the Java API to create files on disks, but IntelliJ provides its own API to access documents and files. And we can just, in updating existing file method, we can just access the document itself and replace the text in it. It's a super quick operation. Interesting point that even if the file is not present, we still don't need to create on the disk, and IntelliJ could create files in memory only. And those in memory files will be equal to the files on disk. The only tricky point here that, because this is not the file on the disk, IntelliJ or Android Studio still needs to know where this file is placed, kind of in which scope, to understand if the scope is shared with the open file, to understand, to resolve completion or navigation or other actions for this class. So that was a tricky point that without adding the scope, the file created were not resolved. So it was worth to remember. Warnings are implemented via the extension points. And also at the bottom, I show there is a link to the IntelliJ documentation. So there is a tutorial how to write plugins, and it's quite good for the base cases. In the annotator, what is interesting is this PSI element. So PSI element is a node in abstract syntax tree parsed from the class. So this annotator, it's not choosing some levels only, By that, I mean that this PSI element might be anything from class to method. So for example, if the user changes anything at the class level, an annotator will be triggered with the callbacks for the PSI class, PSI method, PSI field, PSI method body. That's why it's very important to filter the elements you're interested in for the annotator. Other useful feature is the quick fix, so that you can not only show the warning to the user, you can provide this quick action to resolve this problem quickly. Code completion also present in the documentation and extends the completion provider. So result set, what's interesting here is that it contains results from all other completion provider that were run before yours, so that you can not only add a new element like here, you can actually modify previously added suggestions as well. And creating lookup is really easy. The tricky point here was that by default, if you're not using any provided by the IntelliJ builders, your lookup may end up at the bottom of the suggestion list. I was so frustrated to see it first time, so I was really happy to figure out that I can just prioritize it with one line of code. File templates are really, as I said, they're implemented as an action, so there is no extension point for it. And there is no tutorial currently for implementing new file action. But the good news are IntelliJ code is open, so you can read it as if it was your own. So I just found this abstract class by reading how new Java file action was implemented. And this is a very convenient way because it allows to create a new file by implementing a few easy steps by providing the name of the action, the title for the builder that will be shown to the user, and showing different what kinds of the templates you want to use for your action. Okay, I have covered the base plugin features that we used. So yeah, what I have just described. So this is my journey, how I converted my personal inefficiency in my day-to-day workflow in opportunity to help my coworkers and in the end boost my team productivity with using Litho and Android Studio. To learn more information, this is the link to the IntelliJ official documentation about creating the custom language or custom plugin to support custom language. But in reality, it does not need to be the custom language. Any framework, any architecture that you are using in your team and that are not supported by default by the Android Studio may be implemented using this tutorial. Also, all the files that I showed at this presentation, they're from our Litho open source GitHub repository. So Litho IntelliJ plugin is part of that repository, and you can go and watch them again after this presentation. I can't see you in person now, but I visited Droidcon conference myself in previous years, and whenever I talk to participants, every person was very passionate and active. That's why now I'm sure that you as well can take described methods and approaches and implement them in great ideas to help your coworkers or other developers. If you are interested to try Litho that I showed in the video before and try implementing Android Studio plugin, the Litho plugin project is open for pull requests. I have left, so I see, yes, we still have time for questions. So if you are interested in anything about the defining the problems, about doing the research, about implementing the plugin itself, I'm happy to answer the questions. Also, if you want to find out more about mobile engineering at Facebook in general, you can speak to one of my colleagues directly now during this conference. In this conference general website, there is this partners section, and if you click the Facebook, you can contact my colleagues directly from there. And yeah, as I said, now I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Yeah, I see the question about the Flutter. Is this only for Android developers or is this available for Flutter? I have not used the Flutter, so I know that this plugin is for any IntelliJ-based application. So if you can use the IntelliJ, then you can create plugin for it. Another question about the Kotlin. Is it possible to write plugins in Kotlin? Yes, definitely. I wanted to mention it as well. So the plugins, this is the IntelliJ, right? So they're supporting the Kotlin language, like IntelliJ created by JetBrains, and JetBrains support Kotlin. So definitely plugins can be written in both Java and Kotlin. what other scenarios could you see a plugin useful for? So what other scenarios we were used? There were like almost everything you see in the IntelliJ can be hooked in with the plugin. So for example, all those tool windows on the sites that you see, they could be implemented, hooked in with the plugin. Also, you can access any endpoint because this is the Java or Kotlin, so you have possibilities to fetch data as you can with the Java. So you can hook it with some backend database and fetch data to present it in the IntelliJ application directly to avoid this context switch to search information anywhere else. There's a question about Compose and Litho. So yeah, I know that Compose was inspired by Litho, and I know that it's now kind of in a beta stage. So I don't think that we are ready to move to something that is not stable. And for the Litho, we have steady internal support. So for the nearest month, as I can see, we will still continue and develop Litho. Testing. How easy is to test these plugin components? So yeah, testing. Yeah, you can use unit tests, definitely. And there is also IntelliJ tutorial describes how to implement the end-to-end testing. So you can kind of mock the IntelliJ environment and mock the user actions, for example, the completion. You can mock the completion and see if the results are what you expected. Is there an approval process that you need to go through before getting the plugin published? Okay, so IntelliJ has this plugin marketplace. So if you go into the settings and into the plugin section, you can see that there is this plugin marketplace. To be honest, I have not faced any issues. So I placed this plugin in the marketplace and I did not see any requirements or restrictions. It was like quickly and free. And yeah.